By the end of June, the heat at Jantar Mantar had done exactly what the authorities expected. After 22 days of demonstrations, the crowds were thinning, people had jobs to return to, and the protest was quietly fading. Usually, when a sit-in stretches too long, the state can just wait it out, or apply a little pressure by cutting off the water supply or removing the portable toilets. But that clock reversed on June 28th, when Sonam Wangchuk arrived and announced an indefinite hunger strike. Instead of a crowd losing energy, the public was now watching a man slowly deteriorate day by day. By mid-July, the administration was trapped. Allowing a 60-year-old award-winning activist to starve to death in the center of the capital would trigger a permanent political crisis. But sending riot police to physically drag a peaceful, fasting man out of his tent guarantees immediate public outrage. The standard attrition tactics were useless. Shutting off the electricity or blocking the roads does nothing to stop a man who is simply lying still and refusing to eat. Conceding to his demands would project weakness to the opposition. So, to neutralize the physical threat of the strike without taking the blame for a crackdown, the state apparatus began quietly engineering a third option. On July 15th, a public interest litigation was filed in the Delhi High Court. The petition warned that Wangchuk's life was at risk and demanded he be force-fed. But this filing didn't come from his family, his friends, or the protest organizers. It was filed by a private advocate with absolutely no visible ties to the movement. The very next day, the court issued an order requiring medical intervention and monitoring of Wangchuk's health. Crucially, the text of this order made no mention of forcefully removing him from the protest site. Less than 24 hours after that court order, the sitting Delhi police commissioner, who still had years left on his tenure, was abruptly removed from his post. In his place, the Home Ministry installed Anurag Kumar, a specialist fresh out of the Intelligence Bureau. Within hours of taking charge, the new commissioner summoned his special officers for a late-night briefing. He instructed them to gather at the Parliament Street station at 3 a.m. with 10 men each, under the guise of preparing for a routine parliamentary security drill. A sudden legal petition and a swift executive replacement in the intelligence ranks provided the exact cover needed. On paper, the operation was a court-mandated health check. On the ground, it was structured as a tactical extraction. Plainclothes officers embedded within the protest had been tracking the daily routines of the organizers. They found a single narrow vulnerability, a window around 6 a.m. when the main stage was quiet and key volunteers temporarily stepped away. The raid utilized a 3-layered military deployment. Senior officers managed the outer perimeter. Armed paramilitary held the middle ring. A specialized strike team penetrated the center. Disguised as medical staff, 30 officers rushed the stage, forming a human wall with white sheets to block cameras. The exact moment they moved in, signal jammers killed mobile networks. Electricity was abruptly severed. Filming volunteers had phones confiscated. The operation took just over 2 minutes. By the time the sun fully rose, the state had successfully executed a black ops kidnapping from a public square, perfectly disguised as a medical emergency response. Wangchuk was loaded into a waiting ambulance and transported directly to the 8th floor of the emergency block at Safdarjung Hospital. This chart tracks his potassium levels. The day before the raid, they sat at a stable 4.3. An independent test later showed a normal 3.5. Yet, on the exact day of police custody, the hospital recorded a critical drop to 2.9, the precise medical threshold to justify detaining him. The narrative broke when Wangchuk managed to smuggle a handwritten note out through his wife. At the bottom, he specifically cited his illegal detention. Once that letter hit the internet, it acted as a spark. Student unions across the country immediately called for a massive march on Parliament. Realizing the mobilization was happening, authorities attempted to sever communication again by extending signal jammers. The students countered by deploying offline Bluetooth mesh network apps like Briar and BitChat, tools that actually create stronger, more resilient communication networks the denser the physical crowd gets. Attempting to quietly erase the leader of the strike backfired entirely. The friction of the internet blackouts and aggressive extraction turned a localized sit-in into a decentralized swarm, drawing thousands of students toward New Delhi. The government responded with overwhelming logistics.
They sealed the interstate borders to block incoming traffic, carved the New Delhi district into 15 tightly controlled security zones, and deployed AI-powered facial recognition cameras to identify anyone approaching the site. The capital's intersections were choked with heavy steel blockades and interlocked transport trucks, physically trapping any incoming pedestrian flow into isolated holding pockets. On the morning of July 20th, thousands of students poured out of the metro stations. But the protest leadership had been fractured. Wangchuk was locked in a hospital, and key organizers were either under house arrest or separated by the barricades. The crowd had numbers, but no central coordination. At 11 a.m., the pressure broke. The leaderless groups began surging blindly toward Parliament. The police responded by firing tear gas directly into the remaining seated protesters and unleashing severe lathi charges against unarmed students. The state's meticulously layered defense plan instantly devolved. When faced with a panicked, uncoordinated crowd of youth, the authorities abandoned protocol and relied entirely on indiscriminate physical violence. The students taking blows from those batons were not seeking to overthrow the administration. They were marching because the NEET and SSC exams, the national tests they had spent years preparing for, had been repeatedly compromised and sold. For millions of families, these exams offer the single legitimate exit from poverty. When test papers are leaked to wealthy buyers with connections, it permanently erases the hard work of the nation's poorest youth. The events surrounding the Jantar Mantar extraction prove exactly what the state machinery can accomplish in a matter of hours. They orchestrated a legally tight extraction, deployed thousands of armed personnel, effectively blinded the digital infrastructure, and locked down the capital city. A government capable of executing operations with that level of ruthless, coordinated precision cannot claim it lacks the ability to secure a standardized exam paper. The continuous cycle of leaks is not a byproduct of institutional incompetence. It is a direct reflection of where the state chooses to apply its capability and where it chooses to look away. The trending hashtags will vanish, and the news cycle will reset. But the students who arrived asking for a fair system, only to be met with broken bones and tear gas, will carry the physical memory of exactly how their government decided to answer them.